Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome to this, a quick build of the Arma Hobby 172nd Curtiss H75 in French service. So I picked this kit up quite recently, and you should have seen already the quick inbox review I did on it, and it does look very, very nice. And I do really like the colours, the colour scheme and the markings on this. And I decided I had time, it may transpire that I don't, but we'll see how it goes, to do one final build here at the bench in this house before I move. And there were a few things I would have liked to have used for that, but most of my kits are already packed into shipping boxes, so they weren't really... although they were accessible, I didn't know which box had which kits in, and it would have taken me ages to find them, and this was just sat there and I thought, well, this could easily fit the bill. So you may recall from the review that you do get access to the files for the 3D printed accessories. So I reached out to Sir Drew of Manton, and he has dutifully printed off for me this little kit of extra parts that Arma Hobby allow you to download for free when you purchase this kit. So the £21 purchase price technically does include all these upgrades, although obviously if you don't have your own printer there'll possibly be some cost involved in getting these printed out. On this little box of bits there are replacement exhausts, there's a complete new seat with moulded in harnesses and complete with its bulkhead. There is an instrument panel, some spikes, don't know, maybe they're guns, I'm not sure, a little piece of, I think it's gun sight architecture, and then analog gun sights down here, ring and bead gun sights. There we are. And a seat. Cheeky little upgrades on the kit parts. So the kit will be from the box technically, because technically this is included. I will use the kit decal sheet and the kit masks, and I will be doing this marking option for Jan Zumbach's aircraft, who later gained some fame flying with the Royal Air Force, in fact. I already had some of the colours noted, didn't have some, those are on the way, but we'll look at those in episode 2. It'll be the standard sort of quicker build format, 2 parts, a build episode, which is this one, and a painting and finishing episode, which will follow. So without further ado, let's crack open the box and get on with snipping parts off and commencing this build. So construction begins with the hang on a minute. No, it doesn't. Construction begins with the wing. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But in fairness, the wing kind of is the cockpit too. So this was a full span upper and lower half, and all I have had to do is add 2 wheel wells, and I chose to add the representation of the canvas covers in there because it's easier. So that's that, and then the 2 halves are glued together. There was no requirement to remove the plastic hinge from the inside of the upper wing. As you can see, it's still in there, and here it is. I've managed to get, with a bit of, I put it together the way I always do with the wing. I used liquid cement. I have both Mr. Cement S and Tamiya, I think it's the fast type here, but as I've said before, liquid cement is liquid cement, use what you've got. But yeah, bit by bit, a little bit of glue, hold it together, a little more bit of glue, hold it together, and so on. And by going around like that, I've got a pretty decent joint. I don't think I'm going to need too much in the way of filler, but it will need some rubbing down. A little bit of filler probably right in the roots, I think, and I think that might well be about it. So those are together with the wheel wells in, and the next step from there is in fact the cockpit, and it's built primarily onto the top of the wing. If you don't want the canvas covers, which are the A1 and A6, you use these, which are actually one straight piece on the sprue that you kind of then bend it. It's got some chamfers in the back of it. Here are the parts in question. It's got these notches in it all the way around, and you just bend these and fold them, if you like, into shape, and then sit them in the wing. And you could also actually go as far as to drill them out if you chose to. So yes, construction wing done. That is setting up nicely, but it's not dry enough yet to sand the seams, and I would like to sand the seams before I start adding fragile details to here. So I've been utilising a bit of time not building the cockpit by removing all of the parts from the sprues and cleaning them up ready for use. Not all of the parts clearly, but this is a goodly proportion of them here. What is still left on here is mostly sort of fairly small things that I was kind of concerned that I would forget what they were if I cut too many more things off. So those have all been removed from the sprues and prepared. So I've removed all the sprue stubs, removed all the mould seams, any bits of flash, anything like that. And I did find that quite consistently across these parts there were some fairly pronounced mould seams in the way of things. For instance, these are the two pieces of the nose that fit just ahead of the cockpit aperture here, and both of them have this sort of, on the actual joint face, I really hope it is visible, there's a sort of a raised line. It's almost like a bead of sealant that you might see on an engine case before you put it together. And because I wanted to maintain the alignment pins, what I did was, with the sharp pointed scalpel blade, I'm waiting for the camera to focus, there it goes, I just very, very carefully and gently just literally sliced it back so that that's more flush. And this is the kind of thing that if you do use liquid or normal plastic cement to fix your parts together, it's not really an issue, because it's so small and fine that the glue will be able to soften those small pieces enough that it'll all stick together fine. But I don't use plastic cement for assembly, I use super glue, which clearly doesn't attack the plastic in any way. So it's important, or more useful, to have parts prepared such that the joint is rather good. And as you can see, that's as good as the joint is ever going to be. I also thinned out the rear edges of this, the way these fit onto the fuselage, and I may have been wrong in doing this. I'm sure someone will say in the comments if I am, but it does look to me like this is something of a vent. So when this part is introduced, I do now have a very slight sort of hollowness there. Hopefully that's correct, but it still looks good even if it isn't. So yes, all these parts are ready to have further work done on them, and I will start in fact by, when I get to it shortly, taking all the small cockpit parts off the sprues and painting everything. I've also removed the 3D printed cockpit parts from the little basket, and as I showed you already, there's a seat complete with its bulkhead and a new instrument panel, which is a pretty decent improvement over the kit parts, which are not terrible, but that is definitely better and doesn't need any cleanup. Alright, this has had enough time to dry. It's the next day now, and I have sanded the wing seams down, and I've only used a tiny bit of filling, very much just in this area here, and I've used super glue and talc, which is effectively invisible. I haven't yet rubbed this one down, so you might just about be able to see here. There's still a little bit, and the other thing, that's the only place where I've actually added filler. The rest of it I've literally just sanded it down using the 600 grit Infini model foam sanding board. The other thing I did, which I routinely do, is I filled across the gun ports and indeed the attachment point for the pitot with super glue and talc again, rubbed it down smooth, and then I have re-drilled the holes. This one currently is 0.5mm and this one is 0.6, and I will adjust those as required when it comes to fitting the requisite parts into them. But I do this because it's very normal, even on very good, highly precisely moulded kits, for the aperture to not be quite round or to have a little sort of splits running away from it. So that's why I do that. So this then is good to go. I can start building the cockpit parts onto it, such as they are. So the next stage is to do some painting, but I'll just show you quickly. Cockpit parts, they're not numerous. You've got 3 pieces to go onto this wing top and 2 into the left fuselage side. The seat, mine is a 1-piece item obviously, and the instrument panel, that's it, and then some decals and paint. So this should be quick, and I've already removed the parts, and as you can see they're very small and very finely moulded. Use your good nippers to take these off the frames, because the attachment points are relatively large, and I think it would be very easy to damage these parts simply by removing them from the frames. I've cleaned all these up, mould seams are all gone, but I've not bothered removing if there's a little flash in between. I've not bothered cleaning that up, you won't be able to see it when it's fitted. So add some paint then. The colour is just listed as interior green, which they've listed as yellow green. You can see here all the different colours they give you for that. Real Colour 262, Mr Colour 524, etc. I don't have any of these in stock. Did a little bit of looking online and saw references to Curtiss green, and I've mentioned this before, I think, that a lot of these interior greens were actually mixed on site in the factory. It wasn't like Curtiss didn't go to a shop and order any interior green paint. They mixed it out of, I think chromate yellow, black and other things. So I did actually find a formula, an actual paint formula for the colour, the real full-size colour. Not much use to me, but I also found this photograph. I think it was on Brit Modeller. But this is allegedly a piece of a French Hawk 75 skin, and you can see there quite clearly what the colour we're looking for is, and it's fairly obvious that it's a bit paler than your average US interior green, which the one I mixed is quite a bit darker, as you can see. So I used a supplementary mixing bottle, just cheap bottles, and I've mixed a lighter shade using that normal US interior green, and I've mixed in some white and a little bit of RLM76 to take a bit of the yellowness away, and what I've ended up with is a colour that sits somewhere between the sort of standard US interior green and the Royal Air Force interior green colour. You see it's more saturated and a bit deeper green than the RAF colour, but it's not as dark as the normal US colour, or indeed the sort of even darker interior greens that some US aircraft have. It will do for me though, so I'm going to paint all these parts with that, and then there is some detail painting to be done. And it's very nice actually that the kit instructions do provide a lot of direction as to the various colours required. and there are quite a few decals as well. So I'll get this painted and we'll be back anon. Basic colours on then, this is my little mix, and then I did some masking and I've sprayed some aluminium areas using Tamiya LP11, so there's the foot plates. I've done the wheelbase, obviously I'll pick out the canvas covers with a brush, a couple of aluminium areas on that cockpit wall, and also just little bits and bobs. So here's my colour anyway. If I bring you back the photograph and lay this on here, see it's ballpark. The picture on my screen is making that look like a terrible match, honestly. But to my eyes, my actual eyes with daylight, it's decent. It's good enough anyway. Next up then will be a little bit of wash. I'm going to use Tamiya Panel Line accent colour, this time in dark brown. There's some black, some more bits of aluminium, a couple of little bits of red, and of course some idiot taped the film back over this decal sheet. Can't imagine who that was. There's actually a bunch of decals, including an instrument panel one to affix, and I will do all of that and I'll come back to you with a completed cockpit interior. With the wash, just as an aside, you could do the detail painting and then the wash. You can do it either way around. The thing with the wash is it does help delineate these details a little bit, which can make it actually a bit easier to paint and get nice edges. So it does work both ways, to be fair. And of course there is nothing to stop you doing the wash now and then doing another little touch-up wash once you have actually got the detail painting finished. Here is your done cockpit update, and it has flown together, and I'm very, very impressed with it. So let's start with the wing. Here's the upper surface of the wing now. These small components are added, done a wash, all the detail painting, and I finished the whole thing with a bit of VMS because, well, to be fair, this part didn't really need it, but on these other parts where there are several decals, I wanted to unify the finish because the decals were quite a bit shinier than the rest of it. And I think this is just absolutely lovely. As you can see, it's not very big. You're going to need to break out the tiny paintbrushes for this little beauty. So I did all the detail painting and then I added the decals, and a point to note on the decals, they're by Tecmod and they're very, very good, very, very easy to use. I didn't quite apply all of them. These and these basically were, the carrier film's just a lot larger than the part it's going on to, and it was just more hassle than it was worth, frankly. But anyway, the point I was going to make, there are actually two, all of these cockpit decals, there are actually two of each on this little sheet. So if you mess one up, which is eminently possible on such small decals with a lot of detail to wrap around, you've got another try at it. Here is the seat with its bulkhead. I've painted the seat belts in by hand, and then I did a second layer of wash just around the seat belts, just to help them pop a little bit more. Very, very happy with that. Then we've got the instrument panel. This is a decal again. And I've flat coated it, and then I've added some gloss varnish into the dials. There is also a decal here in this central part, and there is one for this circular control, but I haven't used it because again it was just an awful lot bigger than the part it had to go on. And then there's another little decal for there. It's absolutely superb for such a small area and very few parts. Actually, this has just turned out absolutely lovely. It really does look good, and it's going to look the part when put together for sure. And here is the engine again, 3 pieces is all. 2 sets of cylinders, and then this front part, the crankcase and the pushrod tubes, all just painted in a sort of a darkish silver. Then I've used the Tamiya panel line colour in black to really pop that fin detail out, it's very good. And then this is a dark grey and obviously black for the pushrod tubes, and I think that's absolutely cracking. That attaches to this piece which I have already glued together, thus. And this back part is already silver ready. I glued this together with super glue, and I've addressed the seam, not that there was one, but that's all sanded down and ready to go. Which leaves me now at the point where I can glue the fuselage parts together and start getting these internal pieces. The seat and frame can be inserted from the bottom, and what I'm going to do, the alignment pins on this kit actually sort of interlock. It's quite clever. They sit next to each other and they work in such a way that when you introduce the parts to each other and squeeze, they kind of lock and the thing holds itself together. But I cut these off in the act of, there was a little bit of flash around on this piece, so these locators are gone. So what I'm going to do is glue the fuselage halves together as they are now, and then introduce the cockpit parts afterwards. The seat can go in from underneath, and if I don't glue this front section, I'll be able to just wiggle the control panel into position. So the first thing that needs to be done is just to remove any paint from the joint surface area. I'll do this with a cotton bud which has got some Mr. Colour thinner on it, and just wipe any areas with paint. If you don't, you don't have to do this, but if you don't do this, your glue joint will only ever be as strong as the adhesion of the paint to the plastic, however good that is. I don't like to chance it like that, so and then another point with this, these locating stubs, they do introduce a slight misalignment on the top seam, only very slight vertical difference. There is none on the bottom, so if you really wanted them to be completely perfect, it would probably be best to remove the alignment pins, but it's always going to need sanding, so I'm not really bothered. So I've just squeezed some super glue onto this dish at the side, and I'm going to, and I need to work quickly, put a generous amount of glue on these joint faces. You'll have seen me do this using the tube directly before, and I will quite often do that, but this is such a small model that I'm nervous of doing it that way. So there we go, we've got glue on that side, and now quickly and confidently go together, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. You want that glue to squeeze out of the joint like this. See the shiny area, that's the glue that's squeezed out. Get that to squeeze out, and that becomes the filler, basically. Just like in the olden days when people used to use tube glue, and they would do the same thing, squeeze the joint together and get that bead of molten plastic to come out, and the idea being that when that is sanded away, the joint is then automatically dealt with. The issue with that though is that those joints always move with time because of the plastic being melted. Now I'm going to preemptively paint with this cocktail stick a little bit of glue on the areas where I didn't get any squeeze out. So I have a continuous coat basically of super glue along the top there. That's pretty much it. Now you can wait for this to dry. It doesn't take hours. Or you can pop a little bit of accelerator on there just to speed things up a touch. Now I'm going to use liquid cement in this area here because I'm not remotely concerned about this. This is going to be completely hidden by the tailplane. So I can use liquid cement and know that that's never going to come undone. There we go. It is very dinky. Good nippers and your best paintbrushes are required for this one. So now the super glue is dry enough to sound, and I end up always showing you this part, but I think it's worth it because I think a lot of people don't really believe me that super glue can be this easy to work with. So I have here a skinny stick. This is a Flory model skinny sander. Other skinny sanders are available, which is a good job because these aren't anymore, but I'll keep on using them while I've got any. And this is no more than about a 240 grit here, so you don't need to use super coarse abrasives for this really. And at the moment all I'm doing is taking that bead of glue down. I'm not even touched any of the plastic surface yet. As you can see, starting to in the middle here. There was that very slight height difference, and I know it was this side, so I sort of work onto this side first and bring it down to the level of the other side. Make sure I'm still in shot. What you can't tell, because you can only see the work map, is the setup of the camera as such, and I was very restricted in how I could set the camera up, that I can't bring this end of the frame to the edge of the bench. It is in fact about 6 inches in from the edge of my bench, so I'm almost working fully at arm's length when I do stuff like this, especially when I zoom it in like I have now. So now I've already got the super glue blended into this half of the fuselage. Not quite right at the end here, but basically that's how long that took. Not long. And all the time I've been favouring this angle to do that. Now I'm going to start bringing it around. I'm still favouring this side of the glue. If you start sanding up from this way, you'll end up with a really off curvature. Doing it this way takes a bit longer, but it tends to keep a better approximation of the correct curvature of the part. So what we don't want to end up with is a flat spine or a lopsided one. There we go. So I took the bulk of the height off the super glue first, then I started to curve in from the high side of the joint, and now I've balanced it up on the lower side and got everything looking tip top. And the scratches on the plastic surface spread for a whole probably about 1.5 millimeters each side of that centerline joint. That's it. That's the only damage that has been done. It's very minimal. You can still see the panel lines. I've not actually obliterated them. It's all gone rather well. 600 grit Infinity sponge sander. Conforms. I'm deliberately going in a 4.5 direction here because it allows you to more easily see that you are dispatching the previous scratches because they're transverse. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it, I'm not going at it like a loon, just gently. Done. If you look at the top of the spine from head on, you can see that my curvature's not gone awry. I've kept it looking as it should. I've sanded with the sponge all the way out to this panel line, each side of the spine, but you can easily see there's no issues or damage there. So I'll grab the alpha, 9.5 times out of 10. This is what I use for scribing absolutely everything. I'm going to just try and join these lines back up. I didn't quite align properly, and that's always a bit of a pain. There we go, that's that one. I initially locate the blade into the groove of the panel line, but then I aim it, I'm just looking, aim it where I want it to go. Take that across, like so. Don't need to go too deep, the panel lines are quite delicate on this. And finally, a little magic trick to finish it off. A little touch of liquid cement just softens the edges a slight little bit and makes it look more like the kit panel lines. And there you go. That is 7 minutes I've shot from starting sanding to a completely finished seam. I don't need to sand that anymore. That's a good enough finish for the paintwork that this model is going to have. It's rescribed, it is ready to go. That is how easy super glue is to use. Well, I have the fuselage fully sanded and done now. I did slip the seat and its bulkhead in from underneath, and whilst the front part was still unglued, I just simply held that apart just a touch and added the instrument panel into where it sits as two little sort of L-shaped shelves that it tacks onto in there. As you can see, the Arma Hobby plastic hinges are alive and well inside there as well. They did not need to be removed. So that's that. They then fitted the tail plane. It's a one-piece tail plane. It does have some sink marks because it's so thick, but they go out in this direction and they sit between the panel lines, so they actually look quite good. Look a bit like fairly typical skin wrinkling actually, so I've not bothered to touch them at all. So that was glued on extra thin. The joint is indistinguishable from a panel line under there. Absolute perfection. And on the top I had a slight, and I mean slight, gap in each leading edge area here and across the top. Very minimal, and because of that I've just addressed it with Vallejo perfect plastic putty and sort of just wiped that off with a damp cotton bud. That's all I've done, no sanding whatsoever, and it appears to be very square. So the next part is to get the wing fitted. Now some care is required with this because you've got these sticky out things on the top of it, so if you keep on just jamming it on with a gay abandon, quite likely to break some of these assorted levers, so you have to be a little bit aware of that. And I found the fit of the wing was it was a long way from bad, but it was a bit tricky. I was struggling to get this part underneath to sit back. It wanted to sit like this with a big gap. I don't want that, so I spent a bit of time fiddling around and messing, as you can imagine, and eventually I settled upon the cause of this as being a little slight, and I mean slight, bit of excess width here. So this is designed so that I'm just trying to break those sticky out bits off. These wing fairings sit in this recess here. They sit in and on that sort of shelf there. They don't overlap the wing surface, they come up next to it. And they were a little bit too wide, and that was causing this wing to struggle to push back far enough. So I just used the skinny sander and just carefully planed back both sides just a touch, and then deburred it, and it now just sits on there like it was made for it, as you can see. If you build this kit, you will find that there is a step both sides, but there is supposed to be. There's no doubt in my mind that that is meant to be there. The designers have designed that in, and it matches the equally large step on these walkways. Wing fairings on real aircraft generally, not always, but certainly on aircraft of this era, tended to sit on top of the panel they went to. They weren't generally flush fitted. They're just little lightweight panels that sit over big joints and what have you, to provide a little bit of aerodynamic efficiency. So that step doesn't need to be filled. I know some people don't like things like that, but I'm really not concerned. So what I'm going to do now is remove all this excess paint, as I did with the fuselage. I'm not going to use super glue to affix this. I will use extra thin, but I just want to clean the paint away for aesthetic purposes really. Underneath, this tab at the back here wants to sit proud, but it really doesn't take much pressure to encourage it to be flush. So I'm not anticipating any problems with that. And what I might even do is just give it a wee tweak. There we go. And the aim is here, I don't want to have to do any filling or sanding in this area either. I want that to sit in there flush. I'll just glue it with liquid cement and we should be good. The alignment looks decent as well. Okay. There we have it, and that is very, very good. It's a couple of really tiny little blemish here, which is a slight flaw actually in the fairing route rather than a problem with the fit. And underneath, there's a bit of overlap with the flap, which I think is supposed to be there, and this little panel is also slightly proud still, but I'm just going to leave it like that. I'm perfectly happy with that. Once this is all set up and dry, I will come back in with a little bit of Mr. Surfacer on a paintbrush and just run that along here, and then once it's dry, clean it up with Mr. Colour Thinner, and that will provide just enough weight, if you like, because the liquid cement isn't manly enough to fill that. A little bit of bulk just to completely remove those tiny little blemishes, and they are very, very small. So the next part that needs to go on is this little forward fuselage sub-assembly. I possibly made a slight error of judgment potentially in gluing this together before fitting it, because when I test fitted it, I found that it wanted to sit just very slightly narrow, I felt. So I went ahead and made a small structural amendment with a little piece of cocktail stick, carefully measured of course, and wedged into place, held with a little bit of glue, and that just stretches the back half of this out a little bit, so that when it's fitted to the model, that sort of vent area down the side actually does appear ventish. So I'm going to glue that on now. That will just again be affixed with ordinary liquid cement, and then leave this all to dry off a touch, and then come back in with some Mr. Surfacer and what have you, and just get this absolutely neat and tidy before then going on to fixing the engine and cowl assemblies and the last little bits of the airframe. And I've got to say, this has been a spectacularly easy build so far. I've really been enjoying it. It's very, very good kit. Alright, well the wing is dry, and I used Mr. Surfacer as advertised. You can see the dark lines there. It's just a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, which is 1000, which I put black in, that's why it's so dark, and I have just polished it off with a cotton bud soaked with Mr. Colour Thinner. It just leaves a little bit just to make sure there's no actual crack. I did the same under the back there. That's all good. I've obviously glued on the engine as well, and then I spent a while looking at the cowl. So the cowling comes in 4 pieces. This is the lower section. There are 2 side sections and a top piece, and I was mucking about putting them on the model, and frankly, unless you have at least 4 hands, putting this on and sort of building it onto the front of the model is going to be next door to impossible. It's not impossible, but super fiddly. So I did some test fitting loose as it is now, and I thought, well, do you know what, that actually fits together beautifully. So I taped it, test fitted it back to the model to make sure it would actually fit whilst glued together like this, and discovered that it very much does. So I glued it together, a bit of liquid cement off the model into most of the cowl, and that just slips into position on the model very, very easily, as you can see. And it's easy to locate because on the inside there are some shaped depressions. I can't see what I'm doing here. There you go. Where the cylinder heads sit. And in the top part, there you see that sort of T-shaped depression at the back there. That's where that sits. So it's quite easy to know that you've got it in roughly this. It sort of just locks in. Not tight, it will need glue, but it locks into place quite happily. That leaves the underneath, and here things don't look quite so rosy. I do not think it's something I have done incorrectly, but there is a misalignment, and it seems to be caused by the wing. So if I just put this into position on here, where it's meant to go, again it sort of locks into place, but you can see there's a reasonably large gap here, and it is the same both sides. This panel sitting too far away. So the first thought, I suppose, for most people is, oh okay, trim it down. But my first thought straight after my next thought was, well yeah, but that's going to affect the fit of the cowling. So I looked into it a bit harder, and basically what I've figured out is the reason this gap is here is because the wing has got too much of this. If I push the wing up, I don't think you can even see that moving, but it does. basically you can push that, get the gap where you can see it, see, a moderate amount of pressure is required, but that can be pushed up to meet. Likewise this side, you can get it to meet with a bit of pressure. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to glue this lower cowling on, and squeeze it. To get the best joint I can down here. And then I will address that joint. I'll do whatever filling and sanding I have to do to get that looking ship shape, which won't be much this side. This side's pretty good. But that will have to be done with super glue. I then also have spent quite a few minutes removing from the sprues all of the other parts for the model. And this is becoming a theme. You're probably thinking, yep, you did this last time, gent. I do. So I spent time prepping all of the other parts that are going to go on. So you've got undercarriage legs and doors. These are the little machine gun ends, aerials, wheels, piece of cowling, exhausts, tail wheel here, fin, the rudder. It's one of the undercarriage doors. Let's put that in an undercarriage door related compartment. There we go, and I've got the canopies in there. I don't actually need this. This is the 3D printed gun sight that comes with those extras, and this fits basically on top. I'm going to ping it away here, on top of the instrument panel there, like this. Fits there. But this aircraft doesn't need it because this one is supposed to have the little ring and bead affair that is on this 3D printed piece. I did a minor modification here, the tail wheel. As you can see, I have fitted a brass pin, piece of brass wire. It comes with a small little stub of plastic that's designed to fit to the model, and it just looks, it's not a very positive fit and it's very fragile. So I drilled it, fitted this piece of brass wire, and I have made a matching drill in the appropriate area there, and this now just plugs into place very nicely, and a little bit of super glue will hold that and it'll be nice and strong. Put those in there. I did also spend some time fiddling, finessing, thinning down undercarriage doors and things. I don't know if you can really see that, but they're much thinner than they were. Same with this. This is a little vent that lives on the bottom of the cowl, like so. Oh, nicely done. And I thinned down the leading edge and all of those struts to a thickness more befitting the rest of the model. There's a lot of finesse already built into this kit, so I felt that spending a few minutes thinning those things down and doing bits and pieces like that was worthwhile. They're all in there ready to start painting when I am. So I'm going to get this cowl in place and sort it out until I'm happy with it, and then we're going to move on to the canopies, and that is going to be a subject all by itself, so I'll be back with that later on. I have successfully fitted the cowl. I did need to do a bit of filling. I knew that would be the case, but I think I've done it with just pure super glue, so it shows up as a black line. You can see the extent of the gap that I ended up with, and you can see that it's tapered from front to rear on this part. So it seems like this part wasn't high enough, and in pushing it up I may have angled it up at the front. I'm not really sure, and naturally I could have had a better fit here, but when I did that, this line at the back wasn't parallel, and it gave the aircraft a sort of a squashed sort of boomerang appearance, which I didn't like, and it still doesn't look quite straight to me, the cowl with the front, and it's also slightly different from one side to the other. You can see that line isn't nearly as tapered, and this side of the cowl did fit a bit better. So I don't know. On reflection, I think that fixing the side portions of the cowl first separately to the engine itself may have been better, because I could have aligned these sort of with the fuselage datums a bit more easily, and then fiddled everything else in around it. However, there's no guarantee that this joint would have came out anywhere near as good if I'd have done that. So on balance, I'm not sure what to. It doesn't seem quite round at the front either. Not sure quite what to recommend. I'm thinking it might be best to build the cowl completely and then fit it and just deal with whatever happens here. I also think I might have had a wing with a bit too much moulded in dihedral, which is possibly what's caused all of these issues, because it didn't quite fit at the back either. If you remember, I had to push that in too. So, but yeah, it's there, it's on. Broadly speaking, it looks okay. The lower vent has been fitted, intake. It's very, very thinned down edges, which looks nice and in scale, and I've fitted the little frog eye bumps on the top there, which fit absolutely beautifully. So the last parts of the puzzle with regard to building then are the canopy and the fin. I'm going to leave the fin till last, simply just to save it from being in the way while I wrestle with the canopy. And I say wrestle because that is what it's going to be. So let me get the pieces out. These have all been removed from the sprue and cleaned up. The central portion needed quite a lot of cleanup. There's a bit of flash on the edges and things like that. But I got rid of all of that. Got it nice and all the edges nice and square. These windows, the rear side window pieces, fit quite happily. You see that the area they fit to is quite tapered, and these just will slot into place, and they appear to sit there really very nicely. It's always a little bit difficult to tell until you put paint on, but they appear to fit perfectly happily. I will of course need to paint behind these before I fit them, and this one has to have a hole drilled in it for the fuel filler. There you see the detail, that needs to be drilled out. Both of those fit quite happily. The windscreen is a whole different story. As you can see, it has a piece of forward fuselage moulded in. I'm using the frameless windscreen, a nice smooth one. When you offer it up, it doesn't, there we go, it sort of drops into a position reasonably happily, but then when you look at it, it really doesn't fit. So as it is, it's pretty much in the correct position here. That there's no step between it and the forward fuselage, but look at the gap there and there. So not only is there a fairly sizable gap, but there is also a step here. This piece of the canopy is narrower than this area here. Now I note, I've just thrown that on the floor, there's a fair bit of shape here. I don't know if you can see, but there's a sort of a waist effect going on just here. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct, but both sides of the fuselage do it, so I'm going to assume it is. But I wouldn't normally expect any area where a sliding cowl fits to be as curved as that. I don't know about you. Let me just try and retrieve my windscreen without rolling my chair on. So if I just balance this back on again, and then we'll look at the sliding portion of the canopy for a bit more fun. So rest that into position. And then this piece obviously fits behind it. Now if you just pop it on to the canopy rails, it's massively proud vertically, which I'm just not going to be able to show, because it's not supposed to sit on this area here. On the real aircraft, and it's shown quite nicely on the box art actually, the sliding part of the canopy sits outside, as you can clearly see here, so it should be proud at the back because it's going to come back along the rail, you can see there. So it's supposed to sit either side of the fuselage, not on top, and it cannot, in my case, it cannot do that with the thickness of this fuselage as it is. I wanted a closed canopy, so I thought maybe again I've done something wrong here, although I'm sure I don't know what. So I did a bit of googling and I looked for any other builds, and I could only find two, or I only looked at two, and both of them had open canopies, because if the canopy's open you can just pop it back like this, and the fact that it doesn't fit becomes slightly less of an issue. Well, I don't want to do that, I do want it closed. So what I'm going to do, and it's going to be tricky, and I'm not going to do it on camera, and I really do apologise for this because this is the kind of thing I really should be showing you, I think. But it's a very small model, it's quite tricky, detailed, fine work. If you mess this sort of stuff up, it's really difficult to put it right again. So I need to be able to see what I'm doing and get in there properly, and I just can't do that if I'm trying to show you at the same time on camera because of the geometry of everything. So you're going to have to trust me. What I'm going to do with this is get radical. I'm going to use super glue. This has to be filled both vertically and laterally, so I have to use filler, and I'm going to use super glue and talc, and I'm going to actually fix the canopy into position with super glue and talc, and then I'll use super glue and talc and sand it until I get it where I need it to be. It sounds very drastic, but really it's not something that needs to be panicked about. I think addressing things like this with clear parts is possibly one of the most difficult things to do in this hobby. So I understand modelers being cautious or wary of having to use filler on transparencies, but it's perfectly doable. You just need to use care, go slowly, and give yourself a chance of success, really. So that's how I'll do that anyway. With the canopy, what I'm going to do is carve gently, carefully, basically reduce. There is a scribing on the side here, which I don't know if there, you might be able to see it there, which signifies where the sliding track of the canopy goes. What I'm going to do is chamfer the side of this fuselage down to that line, and I'm going to then reverse chamfer the inside of this canopy, and hopefully between doing those two things I can get this canopy to be able to slip down over in it until it's in the right place. The only other option would be to actually physically cut the side of the fuselage away, and I don't want to do that. And I did carefully check the instructions to make sure I hadn't missed something that tells me that's what I need to do, but I definitely haven't missed anything telling me that that's what I need to do, nor is there anything here saying this kit is designed for an open canopy. I think you'll agree. So there's a fair bit of work to be done with the canopies generally, in between drilling holes, pre-painting areas and carving things and using super glue, and hopefully I'll come back to you in a while with a successful conclusion. Well, I think I've about got to the bottom of it. So the windscreen part has been glued into position, and I've used super glue and talc to address that gap, and all of that looks like it's pretty much okay. It's kind of hard to tell until you put some paint on whether it's absolutely right or not, but bear in mind that whatever paint you do put on, you know, essentially you've either got to rub it all back off again or just use green and work it up that way. So that only leaves the two gaps at the edges, and I'm just going to use plastic card to fill that. So some of you may have been thinking earlier, why don't you just put a slice of plastic card in that gap? You absolutely can do that, and that is how I'm going to do this. And that's because once it's in and done, it will just look like a piece of framing, whereas if I had done that along here, it has to all be blended in properly, and with using a slice of plastic card rather than filler, you've got to address both sides of the seam, if that makes sense, and also it's always visible from inside, so it's actually easier to use filler for this. But for this area I can get away with a piece of plastic card. So what I will do, this is too thick, I will just sand and scrape this thickness while it's a big piece like this until it will go in. Once it will go in, I will then glue it in very minimally, and mostly on this lower side. Try not to glue it to the canopy if you can help it. Glue it into position, let the glue dry, and then trim it down. So that got the windscreen sorted. Then the sliding portion, you can see that I have beveled both of those top framing edges. I also beveled the internal corners of the canopy piece, and it will now fit as it should. It allows it to sort of spread itself across the area where it's supposed to sit. But I then found I had a horrific gap at the top here because the angle of the windscreen doesn't match the angle of the canopy when the canopy is at the right height to match the top of the windscreen. So as it is here now, it's really hard for me to show you this properly because I can't. There you go. You can see maybe that we've got this overlap back here, which is it should be. Both sides come down, although not all the way to the bottom of this, and we're level here. That's all correct, but the canopy leaned back a lot further than the windscreen does. The only way to do that, other than fitting the canopy and filling it and then having it all in situ for paint, which I did not want to do, was to do what I've done, which is to glue a slice of plastic card to the front edge of this sliding part of the canopy, and I've then sanded that back gradually to a nice taper, and it now fits the windscreen properly, or very close to it. And now all I need to do is just polish this transparency back up where I've blended this piece of plastic card. That'll be done with progressively finer grits of sandpaper and sponges. But what I would say is, although I have successfully managed to get this to sort of fit, it is also very slightly crazed. This is quite a thin part, it's very fragile, and just working on it, I don't honestly know if it was already crazed, but I don't think it was. There's a little bit of crazing in there. It's what I'm trying to say really is it's never going to be perfect. I'm satisfied that it's better than it was and it's good enough to go forward, but I'm not going to be able to make this absolutely perfect with what I have here. Disappointing, if I'm honest, because for the most part the rest of the kit, the fit is really good, but then again most of the rest of the kit has got little bits and pieces of flash and mould seams and things like that going on, which if you don't clean them off it won't fit together. And the canopy's been exactly the same, there was flash and mould seams to clean up, but frankly this canopy, this sliding portion was never going to fit in any sort of reasonable manner without some sort of fairly serious surgery. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg really. But I guess we'll talk about that a bit more at the end of this video. So I'm going to sit here and laboriously sand and polish this clear part back to some sort of clarity, and I'll come back to you when all of that is done. And there it is. I think I've managed to pretty much square this away. So I have fitted the side glasses. They appear okay at this stage. We will add a bit of paint shortly and see how it looks. They're just dropped in and glued in with Arma Ultra Glue. The windscreen then, I've taken off the foil. The foil was a temporary measure because bare metal foil masking is really superb. If you need to do sanding and things like this around a transparency, it's a lot more robust in those situations in a way than tape is. It's easier to work around it. You don't tend to get steps and edges because it's so thin, but it will resist sanding quite well. Obviously you do need to be careful, but I do think that looks as though we're going to get away with it. Added the little plasticard sandwiches. You can see them quite clearly at the moment because they're still bright white. What I'm going to do is use a paintbrush, bit of green paint on a brush, and just carefully, obviously not like this, get in there and just put a little bit of green on the insides here, just so there's no sort of greyish super glue and talc kind of looking anything showing through there. This will get remasked and sprayed green along with these. When the sliding canopy then, I've restored its clarity, sanding and polishing, and ultimately dipped it in my X22 and then left it to dry. That has filled in the scratches. It isn't perfect, frankly. This is one of those games where you have to get to a point where it's acceptable to you and then stop. Okay, and then when we fit that on, there we go. So it's hard for me to hold it in situ and make it look nice, but there we go. Now I've used the kit supplied masks on these side windows already, and they appear to fit reasonably well. They're not too bad. So I'll have a look at putting those on this front one. I may need to mask the front section of this myself slightly differently because of this additional wedge I've added, so it doesn't look too terrible. But it's nice to have the option. If you don't use it, you don't use it, but it is always nice to have an option like this that the kit has already supplied for you. So that needs doing. The fin is on. This was in a marked contrast, as simple as popping it in place and adding some glue. The fit is absolutely exquisite. It is offset as it should be. That's that. And the rudder, bizarrely enough, pretty much just clicks into place. Like so. But I will leave that separate because of the need to add that complete rudder decal. So this is the last push before paint, a little bit of masking, a bit of interior green, and then we'll come back for a sum up on part one of this series, the build. And there we have it, a little bit of masking, a little bit of green paint, and that is the build phase, and thus part one of this video series complete. I'm semi-happy with the transparencies. As I said earlier, they aren't perfect, and there comes a point when a balance needs to be reached between one's skill set, patience and standards. We can't always hit the markers completely every single time, but it's not bad. So here's a little closer look with a bit of paint on. It is somewhat easier to see what that looks like, and broadly speaking I think it is acceptable. I will use just a touch on this side, at least just a touch of Arma Ultra Glue just to soften the line a little bit on that window. This one though I think is reasonable. The windscreen, as you can see now, there are no gaps. There are a few slight blemishes and the law of diminishing returns kicks in, and I'm just going to say that's good enough for now. So green paint is on, and from there it's getting into paint. There'll be black next and then getting into colour on the model, which is all the preserve of part two. Masking was done with back taping. I cut tape into squares on the board, affixed it from the inside all the way around the edge of the aperture, and then put tape back in on top of it. A little bit of blue tack each side to bung up the gap behind these windows because you don't want overspray going down there. So it'd be very difficult indeed to get it back out again. Likewise, cowl, as you can see, squares of tape added from the inside all the way around and then covered up from the front, and the same again in the wheelbase. Little squares of tape added all the way around. Bit of blue tack up the front where it gets complicated. It sticks up a bit from the surface, it's not absolutely flush, but that doesn't matter. It's doing the job of keeping paint from that silver painted area, whilst it's not going to cause any impediment to adding paint down here. And that does remind me, I need to check the fit on the 3D printed exhaust stubs because I might actually stick them on before I start paint as well. And here is the canopy with the kit supplied mask. So all of these are the kit supplied masks. They went on without any real trouble. I did cut the windscreen. The windscreen mask is provided in one continuous piece, which I did think was a little bit optimistic, and I did find it was easier to get it. I did basically cut it in half and added the two halves separately, and it went on very easily. So there it is, all put together, and by and large a really, really beautiful little build. It's a very pretty little aeroplane and an engaging kit to build. It doesn't necessarily give you any trouble, but at the same time it doesn't quite fall together. There's a little bit of input required from the modeller, and I quite like a kit like that requires a little bit of you. It doesn't just fall together. I don't mind that. I recognise and respect that some people do. So be wary of that. The canopies, however, certainly in the case of this windscreen, there really isn't anything I did to cause that. And that kind of mismatch, I think, is pretty unacceptable. I don't think there's any nice way to say that. It just doesn't fit. It's very unfortunate. I'm happy that I saved it and it looks okay, but that's a real pity. The sliding canopy part, I know I've messed around and done a load of extra work, which is fiddly difficult work, so that I can have the canopy fitted closed. That's my choice. I could have avoided all of that work simply by acquiescing to fitting the canopy in the open position, which, as I said earlier, seems to be what everyone else is doing up to now. But yeah, the canopy fitting issues really are a very unfortunate and somewhat disappointing aspect of this, because in every other way the build has been pretty darn good. But as they say, you pay money, you take your choices. At least if you don't already have this kit, you're now forearmed, you've seen that this issue exists, and you can choose whether or not you want to tackle it for yourself. So that is it for part one. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for joining me on this little journey. And as always, huge thanks to my members and to the people who support me on buymeacoffee.com. I hope to see you in part two, where I'll show you through the painting and deckling of this beautiful little model. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say, until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.